Hello, I'm Ellie Reeves, the Shadow Minister for Probation. Firstly, I'm so sorry that I cannot be with you today, but I'm pleased that I will still be able to address your conference, albeit virtually, and have the opportunity to thank probation staff for your work. Work that day in, day out keeps the public safe. Work that has such a transformative impact on the lives of so many. And work that is, by any measure, as important as that done by teachers, carers and the police. But it's also work that is not always widely understood by the public or, I'm afraid, by many Conservative Justice Ministers. The Tories have consistently failed to understand the probation service or its value. As a result, the service has faced constant change over the last 12 years, with no real thought for the impact this has on staff or on those you supervise. This cavalier attitude means staff shortages and high caseloads are now the norm. What a devastating place to be for a service that was once the jewel in the criminal justice crown. But the Tories' approach to probation is nothing new. Some of you will remember, way back in the 90s, Michael Howard's intention to staff the service with ex-military and to dismantle probation training. As with future attempts to reorder probation, this plan was contrary to all evidence and purely ideological. Thankfully, Labour won the 97 election and were able to stop this foolhardy approach. And when we left office in 2010, the probation service was in good shape. But then we had Chris Grayling. His ill-advised, ill-judged and completely ideological-driven reforms wreaked havoc with the service. But the government cannot say they were not warned about the devastation this would cause. Trade unions like Napo warned them time and time again. The Labour Party, too, warned of the dangers of these reforms. And we know where this ended, at great cost, not only to all those who work in probation, but to the taxpayer too. Ministers would do well to learn from this catastrophic mistake and start actually listening to those who work in the service. Because we know statistics rarely tell the whole story when it comes to probation. I recently visited my local probation service in Lewisham, and whilst I was incredibly impressed with the team and the standard of new starters, it struck me that once again, the concerns of probation staff and unions were being ignored. When I speak to probation officers, they tell me that what they long for is to be able to do their job properly, but caseloads are simply unmanageable. Officers are having to prioritise paperwork and databases instead of spending proper time with the people they supervise. Spending more time at a computer writing than they ever spend in a room with them is now the norm. This cannot be right. Probation officers, when they have the tools, are able to prevent harm. The nuances that you can spot in a person's presentation when you know them that indicate their risk is changing is only possible when you can take the time to get to know them. But it's staff, not ministers, who carry the burden of worrying about someone on their caseload committing a serious further offence. Given the caseloads and the limited time for face-to-face, this burden is not fair, and for many officers the result is burnout. And the number of people leaving the probation service concerns me deeply. The organisation always benefited from having people from a range of backgrounds and with varying amounts of experience, allowing new recruits to learn from those with decades of experience. Now I fear probation is no longer being seen as an organisation a person can have a lifelong career in. This is catastrophic, not just because of all the experience that is being lost, but also the strain this places on officers' workloads and on the organisation to fill the vacancies. Expectations on probation staff have also grown. There was a time when staff needed to be qualified for at least 2 years to supervise a dangerous offender or a lifer. Now, staff very new in post are supervising very dangerous people. I don't see any assessment from the government on the appropriateness of this in terms of the new officer's ability to manage the stress or outcomes of a case so early on, and whether this also leads to burnout. And inevitably, the collapse of many services post-austerity has made working with those within the criminal justice system even more complicated. Without decent housing, addiction, health and education services available to those on probation, the tasks of reintegration and rehabilitation are much harder. But again, the Tories fail to acknowledge this. So probation desperately needs more support. Support for staff, for the burden they're carrying in managing so many and so much complex, difficult cases. Support to keep probation as a lifelong profession with pay that reflects this. Support to train up the next generation of officers and ensure that wider services are available to those on probation supervision. Now, the One HMPPS restructure plan is something I appreciate lots of probation staff have concerns about. Partly because goodness knows probation has had enough restructures, and because staff know probation must retain its distinct ethos and identity. Because ultimately, probation is a caring profession, like teaching or social work. It's not a tick box exercise to be driven by targets, as it became under the private model. Rather, it is a profession that requires a well-rounded approach centred on individuals and their needs. This cannot be underestimated, and it must not be lost in the attempts to bring the two services together. The Labour Party understands this. And as a government in waiting, preventing crime is one of our priorities. Probation is a significant part of this, because probation staff have a deep understanding of what works to actually prevent reoffending. We know, for example, that community sentences are particularly effective for those who have a large number of previous offences, for those who are given short sentences, and for those with mental health problems. Yet their use under the Tories has more than halved in only a decade. Locking people up is not the answer to everything, as much as the Conservatives might want it to be. But preventing crime and using more community sentences will require a stronger probation service.